Hello everybody, and welcome to a tier list for one of the stranger rabbit holes I think I've ever been down when it comes to this series. So, alright, this is the first of 3 videos that's going to be coming out for this particular topic, but I've been, deep diving like crazy into the multiplayer for Tactics Ogre in both the original version and One Vision. And, yeah, let me tell you, it's, there is some insanity buried in there in terms of the mechanics, because I've said for years, it's like the balance of the game, like especially the vanilla one, seemed like it was made for multiplayer, you know? It seemed like there's so many things that you would just realistically never run into, like down in the skill list, or just weirdly specific items or whatever else, or even cases like, for example, the Songstress, where you got a class that basically can't use any of its abilities normally. Well, not abilities, I mean, like, for example, it's basically an artificer. Like, their entire purpose is just use item builds, and it's just like, who's going to come up with this for the single player on a character you get, like, way far at the end of the game? So, at any rate, let's go ahead and deep dive into this, because this stuff, yeah, this is, like, it flipped the entire, like, quote-unquote meta of the game on its head, so to speak, because, pretty much, to give you a little bit of background, when it comes to the original version of Tactics Ogre in particular, there's just kind of a certain point where the AI just kind of caps off, and that's why you get things coming around like, oh, you know, archers are unstoppable and they kill everything. It's like, yeah, you get really big maps towards the end of the game. You basically have an AI that just stops getting better armor after a certain point, and then, I mean, they don't really stack for elemental resistances in a lot of cases, so they can't really stop certain things. Like, for example, everyone gets access to elemental weapons. They all have fairly similar max damages, like, to a certain point, like when we're talking about, like, time to kill type ratios. But when it comes to archers in particular, they've got the range, you tend to see it more. And, I mean, technically, Fuselaers do it way better, but, yeah, just go ahead and tell me, go ahead and show me that original save file of yours with a long gun or snub fusel in there. Yeah, nobody found those. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get started on this thing. So, for one thing, you'd think archers would continue to dominate it, and there's basically a really good argument for having at least one archer in every team if you're doing multiplayer teams. Basically what I did for this was just like, no holds barred, everyone's got max stats, but everybody's skills start at 1, and I used a quick skill rank up cheat. So, why would I do this? Well, basically, there's certain skills that are not exactly capped. Like, technically, all skills that can rank up cap off at 8, just rank 8. However, there are some of them that are kind of soft capped in weird ways that it doesn't actually tell you. So, like, for example, certain monster units, they will end up getting ridiculously slow rates when it comes to things like anatomy. So, racial skills on monsters, not really as much of a thing in a lot of cases. Or, for example, things like Overpower end up leveling up ridiculously slowly that you might as well have just, you know, capped it off at 4 or something. So, the reason that I do the quick skill kind of method there is that it causes everybody's skills to go from rank 1 to 128 times their normal speed, meaning that anytime those skills would have been realistically ranked up, they would already be ranked up to where they should be within a couple rounds of an AI match starting. Alright, so, let's get started here. So, first of all, archers, you'd think S tier, but no, they're about an A or a B when it comes to the multiplayer. And it's not to do with kiting. I saw that come up a whole lot when we were doing the previous round of tests. It's nothing to do with kiting. Actually, I allowed all maps this time and kind of tried to get pretty nasty with the kinds of combos and types of locations and whatever else. And particularly when it comes to the Castle River map, the archers can basically sit there and kite everybody all day, but that's the thing. A lot of their damage can be resisted, and assuming people are actually figuring out a meta for this game, I mean, hell, I'd be tempted to almost bump them down to B. Like, the Jiggler, yeah, is amazing. It's basically going to be the best range damage in the game. I've seen it reduced down to 30. Like, basically, when it comes to archers, the thing is, they don't have a very high attack value, so their penetration is low, comparatively speaking. Like, let's say high-end melee weapons are like 160, 170. Full Jiggler set is like, I think like 130, 140, something like that. Like, the long gun, for example, is the highest in the game at 210, but technically the highest potential penetration value in the game would be the Sweep Blade, if used on a Swordmaster, if using, I think it was like Mighty Strike or something like that. because it's one of the few cases where you're getting an actual attack bonus rather than a strength bonus. But anyway, either way, like past a certain point, attack value actually ends up becoming better than bonuses. In some cases, bonuses are better. Archer's main, like, gigantic damage boost towards the end of the game there is mostly due to stacking a ton of bonuses that you probably didn't notice were there. So they scale really well off decks. They get a bunch of elemental bonuses, especially if you stack a bunch of augments and things like that. You know, they're suddenly getting like 70-80% bonus damage to each of their shots, and it scales up like absolutely crazy. So the thing is, a lot of that can be resisted, and specifically a lot of the better equipment that people would be carrying around and a lot of stuff that you'd really want to see on a lot of teams is kind of a staple. Like, for example, having the ability to exercise was very important on multiplayer teams. Archers don't get that, which it's fine, whatever, somebody can back them up. But for example, a lot of characters would be stacking holy equipment and things like that, and on a character that was completely stacked for holy, had Attenuate Dark, which, by the way, yes, the Attenuate skills actually have a point. They actually are a good thing in multiplayer. It's crazy. But yeah, like on one character, like let's say there was a Golem that was set up to have really high defenses but had no actual bonus resistance. They were able to one-shot a Golem with a Fire Crest. But on the other hand, there was just like a basic soldier with a bunch of holy gear, and they basically did negligible damage to that guy with the Jiglaset with a Fire Crest. So just so you know, there's a lot more at play that you may not have potentially seen. There's, like I said, a whole deep rabbit hole here. That's going to be the second video on this, because I wanted to do one with the tier list, one explaining the mechanics behind it all, and a third of just like a tournament of, well, more or less my favorite teams from doing all these tests, just to kind of show what kinds of stuff you can do. So yeah, I would say B tier. Overall, not a character or not a class you'd have a whole lot of, but usually you would probably want at least one Jiggly user just to be able to pick off squishier units. Alright, next off, Astromancer. I mean, they're a B. They get, actually, I would say an A. If you stack them for Vitality, and that's something you'll see mentioned a whole lot here, they have access to a whole lot of spells and basically would just be solid overall. Not a lot of their special abilities come into play, but, you know, overall solid spellcaster and things like that. They're going to be a unique unit, which is automatically going to make them faster. So easily an A. It's funny because spellcasters actually have a pretty solid place in multiplayer, because they, well, they're really good at shutdowns, and the AI is pretty good at picking what shutdowns to use. So having a really wide variety of available abilities definitely puts them up there. Alright, next up, Berserkers, B. Another B, again, really strange to see them on par with Archers there. By themselves, as just a single attacker, not amazing, but as you've seen in the main game itself, a good use of Berserk can absolutely change the entirety of a fight, and especially combining Knockback and Berserk on some of the castle maps is just, it's just disgusting. I've seen them, like, basically knock out 3 units in one attack. It's potentially amazing, but it's kind of a roll of the dice there. Their defense isn't really too much of an issue. They actually are able to build both equipment and skills to come up for a lot of their shortcomings. They're just very average. Like, they don't really have an amazing higher-end kind of damage situation, but they're very good at spreading damage around, and they're especially good at any weapons that have debuffs on them. Just kind of like throwing that around like crazy. So they're more or less the one vision unit there. Alright, next up we got the Buccaneer, S tier. I mean, they've already got access to a lot of good abilities as they were. They're a combination of a lot of fairy abilities. They've got access to Evade, which is just absolutely busted when it comes to this. But additionally, one thing to consider is that most classes require some kind of consumables or whatever else. And assuming you're using item limits to some degree, like, I'll go into this more in the rabbit hole, but when it comes to items, usually you want to agree to a limit on... Okay, I would say less agree and more like there's a strategic reason to limit certain items. So, for example, if you've got a whole bunch of ninjas and whatever else, and you want them to actually attack something, you're going to want to limit how many items you give them, because they will just sit there spamming Shadowbind and getting their evade up all day. Meanwhile, you get something like, for example, the Hoplite or the Buccaneer. They're able to just use that on their active turn. and then, you know, they can just go do whatever in that time, meaning that they're more likely to actually be an effective tank than you would essentially expect out of them. So yeah, very solid frontliner. Again, special unit, so they're going to automatically be faster than everybody else. And just so you know, the team that I kind of expect to win the tournament, it's not the one made of special units. That's how nasty things get. But we'll get to that when we get to it. And no, it's not all zombies either. You'd think that would be the thing. There's a lot more counters to zombies, and actually the whole, like, zombie versus living thing actually has a lot more of a debate than I expected. Like, when I first started digging into zombies and things like that, I thought, like, this will be the end-all be-all meta here. Oh no, I was very wrong on that one. Anyway, moving on. Alright, so next up, Clerics. Actually C tier this time around. Reason being that, once again, you can stack them for vitality. You can get the aggro off them completely, and actually they can be pretty solid attacking units as well if you give them Lipples and Spellcraft, meaning that they can essentially open up the fight, throwing out a bunch of high-end Spirit Bursts there, and then from there they can transition into being more of a support unit, but they're going to be very quick, and they're going to be one of your quicker Exorcism units, which, again, every team is basically going to need. Now, they don't heal as well as item healers do, but they are able to heal faster, so this is kind of a toss-up here. You could argue that making an invisible knight is better than a cleric. To some degree it is. But either way, alrighty, and back. Brief interruption there, as, you know, as things do. So, as I was saying on the clerics, yeah, they're potentially a very good support unit. They can actually run distraction towards the end of a fight. Like, basically, all classes will end up breaking down as, like, a kind of, they open up a certain way, they can potentially do this thing, or you can make them transition into another role as the fight goes on, kind of thing. So, I would say with clerics, while you can do a lobber type of setup with them, they won't actually end up doing too great with that. I would say just, like, dedicating to Auglite, and then, like, an early startup with Lipples, and then transitioning into support and harassment with a Silent Light. That's probably the best way to handle clerics, just, like, high vitality, and then building towards, you know, just kind of building towards that support role there. You might not think Silent Light is very good for harassment, but it's got decent range, it's got decent accuracy if you give him Spellcraft. And also, the AI loves to prioritize getting rid of silence, even on a unit that can't actually be affected by it, so potentially, very good distraction unit. But either way, the fact that they don't have a whole lot of push, and the fact that their support is kind of meh, puts them in a C tier, but they are very reliable. But again, definitely an improvement from their role in the vanilla game there. Alright, next up we got the Cockatrice, and Okay, this one's weird, because it's entirely up to RNG. So, I'm going to put them up to A here, because they can potentially run up and completely destroy a fight before it even starts. It's like a solid 50-50. So, ideal scenario, they are an A, they run up, they start pecking stuff, you build them strictly for lightweight, especially zombie Cockatrices are pretty neat. But that being said, usually they're expected to get knocked out early on. So this will apply for Griffins later as well. But basically, for your flyers, your, like, fast flyers and things like that, you want to build them specifically to be able either to evade or attack very well. Expect that they will get knocked out in their initial charge and then come back to life as zombies. Basically, they come back to life, they start attacking from behind. And when it comes to Cockatrices, yes, they can petrify. But the thing is, yeah, if the other team has clerics or whatever else, they can just shake out of it. Most of the time, you'll see teams running items, so they can just shake out of it that way. It's just one of those things that's a little bit easier to recover from when it comes to the AI. So if you have a couple of them and they manage to nail multiple hits at once, or you decide to go for Petra Breath 2. Usually you just want to go for the standard breath, because one attack will be enough to put them into breath range. You're basically requiring them to survive multiple hits if you're going for the heavier attack, but it is potentially an option. I remember them being a little bit short on slots if you're stacking a lot of things, so it might be a little bit of a different choice whether you want to go for one or the other. You probably won't have both. I would say in most situations, though, they're kind of down to a C, because they were a little bit unreliable when I kept testing them. I don't know why. It doesn't seem like their odds should be much lower than many other things, but generally I found them to be pretty darn unreliable. However, on the flip side, Hydras were... I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and say A, just because they have a hard time moving around. But oh my goodness, their whole Charm Breath thing, and especially if you give them Vitality rings there, it's disgusting. They're easily the best monster unit in my book. I mean, if it wasn't for the utter dominance of some of the stuff in S tier, I would be putting it up there. But definitely a very, very solid frontline unit. The only downside is that, yeah, if anybody's putting Dragon Slayer sets on people or running Dragoons, they will probably get shredded pretty easily. Giving them high vitality does give them good survivability against pretty much everything else. But yeah, low mobility, combined with the fact that they kind of need to get in close range to use their Charm Breath. But if they get in close, they absolutely destroy things. So that's pretty good there. Next up, we got Fuselaers, easy S tier on this one. Actually, one of the teams on here, which unfortunately became more topical than I'd like, was based off of a Sabaton song I was listening to at the time, which involved just a whole bunch of undead Fuselaers, and yeah, they absolutely rule. See, the thing is, they're very slow. They are ridiculously powerful to the point where if they survive a few rounds, they get access to Scattershot. They just come back to life immediately, take one hit, and then just go back and just like fire again. Actually, their slowness winds up being a benefit in that situation because they will be able to spam Scattershot like crazy. They are very, very good. The only downside is you probably want to limit it to 2 of them because there's 2 good unique guns. The rest drop off a little bit. Yes, the one that you can actually get for the whole rest of the team, the Bandashimaki there, is very good. I mean, its attack power is still higher than any elemental bow or whatever else. It just doesn't really have any bonuses. So it's kind of like sticking to about 100 damage per shot until you get your insta-kill shots. It works. They're just a little bit slow as far as keeping pressure on, but there you go. Very, very good unit, especially if you have just like a long gun sniper on the team. Absolutely excellent. Alright, next up, we got Dark Priest. I'm just gonna drop them in F tier. They're just, okay, they're not F, they're like E. They're not great. It's just there's other spellcasters that are available. Their equipment is kind of limited compared to those, especially next, since this is assuming you've got Cashwa in your team there, you're better off just having her as a princess there. She's got higher offense, but defense kind of sucks by comparison, so she does tend to get aggroed a bit more. Just not really a huge fan of it. The special ability that she gets, the whole poison thing, it's potentially handy. It's just compared to her other options, it's just not amazing. But again, you know, good for style points. I wouldn't say they're the most amazing for this though. Alright, next up, dragons in general. I'm going to say B, just to put them under the Hydra. They're about some of the best frontline tanks you can get, especially the zombie versions. Not everybody's going to be running Dragon Slayer. It would be too much of a pain for everyone to run Dragon Slayer. But they are a very, very good defensive unit. It's just their offense is kind of lacking. But yeah, as far as frontline walls go, they're, I would say, the second best. Because the absolute best would be Golem here. So, Golems are almost S tier. Their defense is absolutely insane. Actually, the funny part is they're able to shrug off next to all damage coming their way when it comes to a Boulder Golem. And this is basically what I'm going to be basing it off of. The only thing is, there's very certain situations where if damage scaling is high enough, it'll just one-shot them. So that's the crazy thing. Jigglyset, like, their max health is fairly low by comparison. Most units will get to about 700. Theirs is like the 600-700 range, depending on which one you're running. In most cases, because their defense is so high, it's tempting to just not carry Constitution on them, which would keep it in about the 500 range, but Jigglyset on just about anybody would insta-kill them if it actually hits. That being said, they take like 10 damage from everything else. So it's up to you. But yeah, they're slow, their offense isn't insane, but overall, you know, solid unit. very, very solid A tier unit. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it defensively. They're just kind of there as a brick wall that's moving, you know? So, definite excellence on that, which actually puts to mind the next one here, which are Knights going down to C tier this time around. Reason for this, so Knights, you'd think they'd have more offense, defense, whatever else than everybody else, but they really don't. Like, compared to some of the other classes, they have weird limitations to their gear. So while they can, say, like, run heavy hammers, they're too slow to really make too much of a push for that. You can run them as a sort of hybrid spellcaster type situation, but they don't really have the skills to back that up. One of their more unique uses is as an invisible cleric. Basically, you give them the stinky set, and you just, well, you stick them wherever, and they'll just run around healing everybody for free. And in fact, one of my favorite builds in this whole thing was one that I was calling the Stinker, which involved giving him the Stinky set and giving him the Medusa shield. So they end up opening up, running out, and petrifying a bunch of units, giving everybody else time to potentially go forward. Bit of a downside, any unit with a Medusa shield, for whatever reason, seems to have a 50-50 chance of just aiming it at themselves. No idea what that's about. Anyway. But yeah, they can make use of most of the healing abilities. They don't get AoE heals, but still, you give them Guardian Force or something like that, they run up, you know, you set them on Vanguard AI, they run out to the middle, they end up tanking a bunch of damage for people, then they just spend a couple rounds healing themselves, and so on and so forth. Potentially really useful for that. They're, I would argue, a way better support as an invisible healer than a Cleric in a lot of cases, especially if you give them, for example, the Stinky set, and then you replace the Medusa shield with the Rassian or something like that. Then they can exercise as well. Ready, and back. Okay, so, to finish off on the Knight here, basically the way that I see them in multiplayer is more of a sort of armored version of the Cleric in a sense. They're trading off that Cleric speed in order to have a bit more survivability, but they serve a lot of the same roles. They can heal, they lose that AoE, but they get some better equipment options as a result. They potentially can do a bit more damage, especially, again, if if they're invisible or whatever else. They do have some options for countering Terror Knights and countering Silent Light and stuff like that. So they're good at, again, just good general overall support, but you'd think they'd have more push than they do, because most of their offensive roles, I feel like, could be better served by other units. But again, your mileage may vary. There's so many things to try that I definitely have not tried everything yet. So I'm looking forward to potentially someday, being able to actually host a tournament of stuff that people fully submitted themselves. But anyway, hopefully this will all maybe inspire some creative ideas in people. Okie dokie, moving right along here. Necromancers, A tier. This is mostly because of how good zombies are in multiplayer. Now, there's a lot of things that counter zombies. There's a lot of things that very hard counter zombies, and in fact, it's one of those cases where potentially it's worth hybriding a situation where you give a warrior the Stinky set and a Baldur +1 to just basically go in there and completely crush any undead they come across. But the thing is, Necromancers are really good at instantly bringing them back to life. They can still serve as very solid spellcasters. In fact, they do that so darn well that I'm tempted to put them into S tier. Because, yeah, and they can just animate dead and then Balmy Breeze. It's crazy. It's crazy. They basically have the ability to push, debuff, and support at the same time. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Liches can technically do the same stuff, kind of, but they're slower. They seem to have... they have a lot of other spellcasting abilities and stuff like that. But again, they're kind of a pain in the neck by comparison, and also they don't seem to be as fast. Now, they might just be the way that I built them. Generally speaking, I've seen Necromancers just do a lot better than Liches for whatever background reasons those may be. Technically, Liches have more, or have better options when it comes to damage. But again, it's the debuffs that are going to be the bigger deal there. Do I have them on this list? I don't have Oracles up on this list yet, but yeah, when it comes to magic damage and things like that, that is 100% the Oracle that's going to be winning on that front anyway. Anyway, moving on. Griffins are another S tier. Now, compared to Cockatrices, the thing is, A, they're faster, B, they're a little bit tougher, and C, they've got Blood Siphon. So what you do, you take a bunch of Griffins. Probably the most successful one was 4 Griffins for these teams here. You give them Blood Siphon, you turn them into zombies, and you just let them loose on the front line, give one of them a Crest of Fire, and suddenly they're running around with different speeds. This basically means that, hey, you might lose 1 or 2 to exorcisms or whatever else, but you give them a bunch of magic evasion type rings and things like that. That gives them a chance to avoid that entirely. Additionally, you stack them for all those magic evasion things, because they've got up to rank 4 in each of those, if I recall correctly. They're one of the few units I've seen that actually did a pretty decent job of evading exorcists. But yeah, they just evade all that nonsense, and then they just keep coming back, and then eating units, and eating units, and eating units. Don't even bother for the crazier stuff, because yeah, they can just keep eating themselves back to health. One of the big downsides of undead units is the fact that they can't heal, unless they're a griffin, and they're also usually a little bit slower, unless they're a griffin. So yeah, very good unit. But definitely one of my favorite things to play around with in this little contest here. But one of their big counters, Angel Knights. One of the things that started my curiosity on this bizarre rabbit hole of the multiplayer was a line in the guide that said that Angel Knights are potentially some of the most dominant units. And you know what? I think they built this game in multiplayer. Because it certainly holds up there. Yeah, when it comes to Angel Knights, they can more or less just throw out easy 200 or 300s in an AoE against all undead things. If you're doing it manually, they can just turn off the undead status entirely. They can counter TP builds by removing MP and TP and stuff like that. They've still got great access for gear, plus they can fly naturally. A lot of the higher-end gear actually comes with lead-proof, which counters the main thing that, grounds them to the ground. And yeah, they're just solid tanks overall, even aside from all that. Plus, potentially can heal if you really want that. Like, they can just do a bunch of stuff, and if you let the AI go nuts with it, they tend to do really well. So, yeah, definite S tier, just because, yeah, they get so many fantastic options and everything else. Like, they can completely outclass clerics and knights by smushing them together and then combining them with half of a griffin, and it's just great. It's just good times. Alright, next, fairies, A tier. You basically got their AoE charm, which, by the way, I forgot, Angel Knights have AoE charm as well. Like, Angel Knights, everything a fairy can do a little bit better. Granted, they get charm instead of fairies get bewitch, which is like their main thing that's absolutely insane. Like, if they get into the center, nothing ends up curing bewitch. So yeah, that's absolutely devastating, but fairies are a bit harder to build for vitality. But yeah, fairy rogues are astoundingly good. Just, again, they kind of require they kind of require a bunch of tricks to be able to push out offense. They have a harder time dealing damage to things. But when it comes to distraction and or potentially support, very good. Again, still have good vitality options. A lot of classes have more vitality options than you may think. And you may say, hey, that, maybe they're not stacking for defense or whatever else. When it comes down to it, vitality is your best stat when it comes to defense. Like, defensive threshold is nice. When it comes to vitality, it scales down absolutely everything. Anyway, moving on. Speaking of vitality, we got the... Wait, this is the Jugger. We're not doing Jugger yet. Hoplite. A tier. It's got evade. It's got spears. High vitality plus spears plus evade. You've got a unit that's going to last a while. Really, really sturdy. So when it comes to tanking, this is going to be your... Like, I would argue the best. Like, Hoplites and Golem, or Boulder Golems are going to be your best tanks overall. Very, very, very sturdy. But, well, there's not really a but. They're actually pretty average speed. Their movement's okay. The reason you go for spears is because since they're spending a lot of time tanking, it does give them good opportunities to potentially rebuild that evade. So they can potentially attack 2 units, put evade right back up. So, very solid setup there. Dragoons, B tier, just because they're kind of... Well, you can build them for a lot of roles. They've got a lot of good equipment options. I would say thrown weapons plus the Slayer skills are probably Alright, it's certainly a full day for disruptions today, but alright, so when it comes to Dragoons, personally, probably my favorite setup was a bit more of a conservative one, going for like a thrown weapon skirmisher type deal, but keeping Dragon Slayer and Beast Slayer on them. But again, Beastbane, Dragon's Bane, things like that, you probably didn't use them much in single player, but keeping them on a thrown weapon build end up working really, really well, because it gives everybody a bonus against a particular unit type. And additionally, because it's a thrown weapon, they don't have any finishers, which means that they will be saving their TP for other things that you want them to be using them on. Actually, potentially, that's really useful for hoplites as well. But either way, just kind of throwing that out there. They're a pretty solid defensive midliner. In some cases, they've been pretty good as a solid offense unit. They're actually pretty good as a item user as well. So while they don't have any dedicated spell abilities, they do have a lot of equipment options that can give them those abilities. So, you know, do with that what you will. Alright, next up we have the Cyclops. It's a good spellcaster. It's got some interesting debuff moves on their action list. And yeah, they're just good at all ranges, good at all times. They don't really have a whole lot of build options, but they definitely got spells and things. I would say Earth and Wind are probably my favorite ones when it comes to their loadouts, but I mean, usually Dark is the one you go for if you want to give them the most debuffs. I mean, item-wise, you really might as well just give them a Ring of Mind, just so that they're more likely to land those debuffs. For anyone that somehow missed it up to this point, yeah, Mind is the one that you want to use if you're doing debuffs. Intelligence is the one that you want to boost if you want to do the big damage numbers. Generally, debuffs are going to cause a lot more chaos. But, you know, again, up to you. Do what you will. Alright, Juggernauts. C tier. They do a lot of damage. They can run pretty far. You know, big lizard with big hammer, do big run, and or orcs, whatever you prefer. I would say their debuff moves don't really see a whole lot of play in multiplayer, or at least not as much. But, you know, they work. They're alright. I mean, they're very good at running around and catching things. It's just that, yeah, they're a Berserker, but they go faster, and they don't have the Berserk move. So, yeah. The AI tends to pull some pretty weird moves, so a higher movement range isn't always the best thing. But when you have something, like, let's say there's a team that uses a lot of fairies or a lot of ninjas or whatever else, Juggernauts are a great counter to those. And, alright, moving on. Lord, S tier. Like, Brynhildr and Eracian is ridiculous. Like, the stereotypical, you know, double Holy Sword Lord kind of setup. The good boy build, as I like to call it. It's completely busted in multiplayer. Mostly because it gives them exorcism while having more exorcism, while having more exorcism, while having lasers, while having summons, while basically just being able to work at all ranges. Support, attack, whatever else. Just, they kind of do everything, you know? Just solid class overall, as you'd expect. It's a little boring, but it does the job really well. Next up, Knight Commander. This is going to be weird, but C tier. They're fast. They've got good offense. They've got okay defense. For whatever reason, she seems to get targeted a lot more than many of the other unique classes, and I'm not 100% sure why. But yeah, she mostly just seems to run up and hit stuff. They've got good abilities. They're similar to a Dragoon and a Warrior mixed together. They've got good weapon options. Actually, if you felt like allowing cheats in terms of using double unique weapons, you could do double supple weps, which is hilarious. But, you know, they're actually the only class that can do that. But either way, they're good. I just don't know why it is that they always seem to get completely trounced in multiplayer. Like, statistically, they should be able to be up ahead in front of everybody, but something about them just does that. And I've tried going for the, like, standard two swords thing. It seemed like her whip build actually seemed to function the best overall. But yeah, she's got a bunch of neat options that you can go for. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to put her higher, but just, yeah, every time that I tried a different build on her, and bear in mind she went through like 15 different iterations, she always ended up getting stomped about halfway through the fight. I'm not sure why. Anyway, moving on. Ninjas, A tier. Steel Stance is still busted. They've got very high damage potential. They also tend to get sniped fairly early. They do work fairly well as ninja or as zombies, but bear in mind they also kind of suck at evading anything magic-wise for some reason, even with being stacked towards that particular end. So there's pretty much no way they're getting out of getting exercised. I've had some luck going for like a high-end one-handed katana build with going for shields instead of double swords. Actually, I forget what it was, like the Golurk or whatever else, the high-end, or was it the Awakener? The high-end fire sword is the one that ended up doing really well with a shield. Potentially doing like 500s with a single attack. And again, just stacking them with a shield tended to work pretty well in terms of helping them stay alive longer, and especially stay alive long enough for their support to be able to show up and revive them. But yeah, steel stance, still busted. So if they survive to the point of being able to use it, they're potentially a fantastic unit. Just expect them to go down in the first wave. Alrighty, next up on our list, the Kraken. Well, just the octopus, but the Kraken sounds cooler. Anywho, yes, S tier, same reasons as they were in the base game, because Acid Rain is, well, it's certainly an ability. It basically turns your situation into World War I real quick. But yeah, they are a little squirming war crime waiting to happen. Just Aqua Veil, Poison Rain. I mean, it works on every map. They can basically use their water abilities on a frickin' volcano. But the thing is, the AI loves to bunch up, and these things absolutely love to punish bunching up. Now, you don't want too many of them, because they have a hard time moving around, so usually you want to have a couple of them off to the sides. They find an opening, they do big damage, and then they squirm away again. If you combine them with a Beast Tamer, bear in mind, under this particular rule set, they have a little bit of a hard time building up the range on their beast boosting moves, but if they end up combining together, a single Poison Rain can potentially wipe out half a team. But again, it's not exactly the most likely thing to happen, but it is, like, when it comes to both damage and throwing out poison, it is just, it's ridiculous how good it can potentially be. Unfortunately, it's the AI, so, you know, friendly fire is bound to happen. But think of them as artillery, and there we go. Speaking of Beast Tamers, they're just going to sit down here in E tier. They've got good options for being skirmishers, don't get me wrong. They're on the low end of effective skirmishers. If they combine with beast units, they're an amazing unit. Like they've got okay gear options. They're kind of limited out of some of the heavier stuff. Really, thrown weapon skirmishers are the best thing I'd potentially use them for, or Damask +1s, or potentially you just have them be the Balder guy, you know? You have them throw out all of the little Balder arrows, get all those undead points and whatever else. That actually probably would be a pretty solid approach. Because then they'd pretty much always have TP to spare. If you give them a Balder bow, but you don't give them bow skill, and then Demonology would replace the bow skill, basically function like a thrown weapon, except it's a Balder thing. There we go. You're welcome. There's a build for you. Moving on, Paladin. Let's see. Not that it's, I mean, we're talking about multiplayer on a cheated file, so everybody's going to be available. Actually, not C. I guess B. Here's the funny thing. You know what makes the best Paladin build as far as I've seen? The Ogre set. For some reason, despite every other like wholly aligned unit not being able to use the Ogre set, he can use the entire thing. He can be an evil Paladin if you want. So that's fun. I would say arguably that's just the best thing to do with him, because it turns him into an absolute powerhouse while not really stopping any of his other abilities. I mean, he's big dude go hit thing. Like, there's not really much more to it. He's not exactly a very exciting class. I mean, it's a Paladin. It's going to be boring, I guess. It's just required. Moving on. Ranger. D, actually. He's got stuff. He's got damage, but his low vitality and resistance and everything else, he gets trounced in multiplayer. Even with a Jiggler set and everything else, he just gets completely steamrolled like 3 turns in. Yeah, I never really realized his defense was that bad. Like, I always got a sense of, like, wow, he's getting crushed real quick. But yeah, in multiplayer, it becomes very clear how much of a glass cannon he is. So, that's just going to kind of go over there. Next one might be a little bit surprising. Terra Knight, S tier. Yeah, I know, right? Frickin' Terranite Nest here. Yeah, so the thing is, sure, on paper they're slow, and you know they're a hybrid build, so they gotta do a whole bunch of different stuff. Consider this though: Ogre set plus light crossbow plus everything that they usually get dark magic wise. Then give them a vitality ring. Suddenly, nothing's attacking them. They've got a move that can insta-kill things, and every time that they're not within range to snipe somebody, they're paralyzing somebody, or stealing their health, or going and slowing them down, or whatever else on their debuff list they feel like vomiting out that day. They are an absolute nightmare. It's crazy. Like, you'd think Ogre set plus light crossbow is dumb. Yeah, no, it's basically a pistol doing 500 damage. And then if they get Death Whale, there's not a single unit in the game, regardless of vitality, defense, whatever else, that is able to survive that. I've seen them throw at 1800 damage with a freaking light crossbow. It's nuts. And that's not the only thing you can do. Surprisingly, a Sagara build, just like going for cudgels, that works, and it helps with their debuff stuff. You can potentially go for axe builds or whatever else if you just feel like getting cheeky with it, but as far as a single unit, like, even just throwing out Lament of the Dead as just an extra move, they're able to basically break multiple units around them. They've still got ranged options. They've still got debuff options. Like, as far as units that are able to push the entire fight forward, Terranites are absolutely just the top of the list there. It is insane how good they can be, especially considering how maligned they are in single player. Oh, shoot. Hang on. I just messed it up. Messed up the recording tab dealy. There we go. That's a little closer to better. Alright. Next up, White Knights, A tier, Paralysis Blade is great, Velocity Shift is great, their stats are great. They're a little iffy on doing much beyond that, but yeah, as far as keeping the fight going, as far as frontline holders, fantastic. Definitely way better than Knights, and actually way better than Paladin, weirdly enough. Alright, next, just because we gotta laugh at them, Swordmasters, F tier. I mean, okay, I tried really hard to make them not suck. One of the teams that was seemingly going to be one of the better ideas relied on Swordmasters, but it's just, really no matter what you do with them, they're still garbage. Even in a case where I had a guy that had enough vitality compared to the rest of the team, with a team that functionally kept reviving every few seconds, that this guy would basically never get aggro unless he was, well, within melee range and nothing else, meaning that he'd be able to use preempt in order to be able to hit them. And then I decided to just make him Hobrim so that he's a little bit faster and a little bit better. Yeah, they still sucked. They still sucked. And then I tried to give them 2 backups so they'd be able to do, you know, more buffs and things. And they still sucked. It's just, their gear options are awful. Their gear options are awful. Two-handed katanas are absolute trash. Again, Sweep Blade might be the single highest attack power in the game with their ability, but everything about the class is a frickin' gimmick with very few redeeming features. They're fun to play around with in single player, utterly worthless in multiplayer, even with things like Bedeviling Dance and things like that. Because why would you use that on a class that's awful and has terrible defense, even with vitality stacking and things like that? Even with a Fire Crest and everything else, they still handily lose to Angel Knights that can just do a better version of that. Yeah. Plus, they don't take consumables. Plus, they can frickin' fly. Plus, they can actually have armor. So, yeah, no. Swordmasters are just absolute trash. They are the bottom of the dumpster. They're like the fluid that's been there after, like, a really snowy and then rainy day, and then suddenly it became summer and it's just that horrible sludge on the bottom. They are that part of the dumpster. They're not even the top dumpster fire that's going on at that time. They're real bad. Alright, next up, we got Rune Fencers. A tier. They can recover themselves even in zombified status. They've got excellent gear options. They can be whatever you want them to be. I would even, like, if it wasn't for Terranites being so crazy nuts in this game mode, I would say they'd be an S tier. But they're the most flexible unit in the game by far. It's not even close. Moving on. Wizards C tier, only because they don't have as many defensive options, but they're very, very good. excellent accuracy for debuffs and things like that. Meditate is amazing. The only downside is that, yeah, they don't use Extend as often as they should. That would easily bump them up a decent bit. You can stack them for Vitality, just not very far. So they do tend to drop pretty early. And they do tend to need a decent amount of MP to keep being charged, which puts Warlocks into B tier. Great for shutting down units. Draconics are pretty strong. Again, you have to kind of build around them in order to make sure they don't get squashed early on, but they can potentially be a pretty good presence. Warriors, A tier. Once again, just very good adaptability. A little bit lower than the Rune Fencer, but you know, they get things like they're basically going to be your second best Ogre set user. If you don't want to use a Terror Knight, or you want to use a Terror Knight in some other way, they have the most options when it comes to the Ogre set. Ogre plus Dagger plus a Dex build is actually a pretty interesting, like, Roman Centurion, whatever kind of deal. There was some complaints last time that I didn't cover Gremlins, so here we are. We've got this thing going ahead and representing the Gremlins. They're like the fairies, but garbage. That's all there is to say. Just use a fairy instead. Moving on. Sorry, I just noticed that I was kind of running along on time here as far as I'm rushing past these last few. Vartan, I'm going to say C. Offensively, they're great. They've got options. They've got decent stats. Downside, though, their movement range is... Well, okay, it's not their movement range. Their movement cost is really high for some reason, and the AI just cannot help itself but move. So if you set them to, like, a Vanguard AI, or potentially just a melee AI, even if they're using ranged attacks, you might be able to mitigate that somewhat, but they have a hard time going without support, but they do have potentially interesting options to work with. Songstress, I'd say B tier. I've actually seen them potentially get in there and just more or less do the Swordmaster thing with an AoE charm move, but do it a lot better. They've got a good list of AoE debuffs and things like that. They can actually be a pretty solid melee powerhouse. They're a little bit... Well, they're in B tier because, yeah, they do... if they try to take on some of the heavier units, they will just get squished. But they can actually be pretty defensive. So, yeah, actually a really good unit in multiplayer. Next up, the Weish. D tier, just... lower defense, you know? They're just not as good spellcaster-wise. It's just D is kind of for low defense, I guess. Which actually puts the Oracles up here in A, because, yeah, they're the ones throwing out 400s with massive AoEs. They're basically able to overcome the lower defense that they're running with just sheer power. Next up, we got Rogues. Okay, I'm going to say S tier. Just because of their speed alone. Put a heavy or just like alternating heavy and light crossbows onto a bunch of rogues that are zombies and have nothing else on them. Just basically ring plus weapon. They get hit once, they throw out a death whale, they die, they come back. They come back quick. They are very quick to come back on their feet. Yeah, they're the best for that, like, die and come back strategy. They are a human version of a griffin with an insta-kill move, basically. So I'll put that there. Princess, B tier. They're strong. They're durable. They're alright. I mean, I just don't feel like they push that much. They're a good line holder. I just don't think I'd prefer her compared to some of the other ones, because she does tend to just run around spamming heal moves. But she does have good options. She's, you know, whatever. B tier's fine. I would say A tier, but it also would kind of drop this whole entire line here. In fact, you know what, let's do this. Let's put Lich down to B tier, let's put her up to A tier. I feel like that's probably a little bit more appropriate, because she does have a decent bit of good options. I don't know why I have Shown Zone here. That makes no sense. Let's get her out of here. Hello, okay, kind of a editing version of Potato Guy over here. Long story short, yeah, Priest, S tier. This one over here, I forgot that I had her representing the Priest. Long story short, yeah, they get Holy Water. It's going to be one of the cheaper moves when it comes to kind of active turn exorcisms. The AI absolutely loves to spam Holy Water, so very useful unit there. And yeah, just if you're going to have Cashua or something, no harm in using that. Although, to be fair, To be fair, I should probably have those the other way around, because Princess can do it a bit better than Priest. The thing is, okay, so when it comes to the squishier caster classes and things like that, if you stack them for Vitality, losing access to some armors is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. So personally, I've seen a lot more success come out of the Priest than I did for Princess there. But yeah, they're arguably very similar. But if we're just counting the class itself, you know, Princess can carry over Holy Water, doesn't necessarily have access to it by itself. I would say Priest is just basically faster and more likely to succeed, but Princess has more options. So whichever is better for you at any given time. Arguably, the two can be switched back and forth. I'm sure somebody will get mad about that. Anyway, moving on. I think this was supposed to be the One Vision one. And then lastly, we have the Patriarch. I'd say B tier. See, like, it depends. If you have an enemy team that's got a lot of casters, they can become invincible to that. They're a very good defensive mage. Again, not a whole lot of push potential coming out of them, but they are a very good frontline spellcaster, very good as a zombie because they're actually able to survive long enough to recover their MP enough to, like, come back to life and just basically have that second life potential there. But, alright, so that's everything I have to say on this for now. Keep a lookout for 2 other videos following up on this one. Just to kind of qualify everything that I just said here, because like I said, multiplayer is such a different animal to single player in this game. It is crazy. There's so many things to dive into. There's so many things that just wouldn't even seem useful until you get into the, like, an AI multiplayer tournament type situation. It's been fun. It's been a really fun dive. Anyway, I'll see you then. Take care.